everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. Surprise! I'm starting a new project, and if you saw my last video on my 2021 plans, then the project won't be that much of a surprise to you. But if not, here's the project. Okay, here's the fabric for the project. This is a cotton quilting fabric, actually a Christmas fabric that I got from Joann's. I forget exactly how many yards I bought because I got it in 2 pieces. I'm hoping I have about 10 because I am going to make this dress. Or really, I'm going to make a combo of this dress and another dress because the trim that I'm doing on my skirt is going to be like this instead of like this. But I am super excited to dive back into the 1880s. I love the 1880s, and this is an early 80s type silhouette. And you can tell that because the bustle is a little bit smaller. And also there's trimming on the skirt. Later in the 80s, most of the skirt trimming disappears and you see very plain underskirts with really big shelf bustles and asymmetrical often draping on the top for the overskirt. So this one is an earlier 80s look where you still see some of the trim, or really a lot of trim, on the underskirt, and the overskirt tends to be a little bit more symmetrical. I'm aiming for about 1883 or 1884 here with this project. Now, normally I tend to do skirt patterns from Period Costume for Stage and Screen by Jean Hunnessett or Patterns of Fashion by Janet Arnold. But I was looking through my patterns and I realized that I actually have a pattern for an 1880s skirt. Now granted, this specific pattern is a little bit later in the 80s, but there is one view A, that I think can work for earlier in the 80s or really any time in the bustle period as well. And that is Truly Victorian TV 263. This one here. Now I am doing this little plain guy that they shoved back in a corner. So it's a much simpler skirt, and honestly I don't know if I'm going to follow the instructions. I think I'm mostly just going to use the pattern shapes for this. So I'm starting by putting the undergarments on my dress form. I'm using Lady Jane here in the hopes that she's a little bit closer to my form. This is the bootstrap form that I made several months ago, but I still have never actually altered her, so we shall see. So undergarment wise, we're starting with a lobster tail bustle underneath, which is the big wired bustle shape. And I did this lobster tail bustle off of a tutorial from American Duchess. And then this bum pad on top. And when I do 1880s styles, I always tend to put the bum pad on top because that does help to give it a little bit more of a shelf look, even though we're going for earlier in the 80s here. This bum pad is actually of my own design. If you guys are interested, maybe I'll release a pattern on Patreon for it, so let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. But basically what I've actually done here is I've taken the petal-shaped bum pad that I think American Duchess first put out for an 18th century bum pad years ago, before most people kind of went to that split rump shape. And I realized at some point that if you take that bum pad and add in like one of those little half moon bum pads that you use for like putting on top when you're doing an 1890s look, if you combine them together, they make a kind of a nice large 1880s pillow type pad. So that's really what I did. I literally used to sew together my 1780s bum pad with my like 1890s bum pad, and then I would sew it together and then I'd rip it apart, sew it together and rip it apart, and that was stupid. So at some point I made myself a new bum pad, and it is just those two combined all into one piece and then quilted in various places. And again, it really helps to give that nice sort of shelf-like look on here. Now over this, I'm actually going to put a bustle shaped quilted petticoat. This is made out of Matalas, I don't know how to pronounce that, but fabric from Joann's, and it's the same fabric that my 18th century quilted petticoat is made out of, but I made one bustle shaped. So this was, I believe, a pattern from Period Costume for Stage and Screen, one of their diagrams, but basically it's pleated in the back with some gores in the front, and I love it for winter, but also it gives the most beautiful shape because it really is stiff. It just stands up. So I really love wearing this, and since it is January, I figure I have an excuse to wear my awesome quilted petticoat instead of the ruffled petticoat that I desperately need to remake because it is ancient. So this is going over this shape. Now, a quick note about Truly Victorian patterns. With their patterns, they always recommend going and drawing out lines between like what you are on their size chart for waist versus what you are for hip versus bust if this was a bodice pattern. And for this pattern, it says that I am a size K for my waist, but I'm actually a size M for my hip. And actually I'm just slightly smaller than a size K, but it's really super close to a K. So that is a 2 size difference. And honestly, drawing that sort of shape out all the way to an M, I feel like is just going to make my patterns look kind of screwy. So that is not what I'm planning to do. I'm planning to draw this out to an L. You can see I've kind of drawn in a line here already, and that will give me kind of a nice subtle curve here, but not be so extreme, like drawing it out to an M. And what I'm going to do here, because this is the nice thick paper that the patterns come on, this was not a downloaded pattern, this was one I actually had the pattern for, I am going to fold in the excess because these are expensive patterns and I don't want to cut off excess sizes if I don't need to. And since they're pretty much long straight patterns, it's totally fine to fold them. Speaking of long straight patterns, I'm actually only using the side and the front of this pattern because the back is a long straight pattern. It's literally 22 inches across on the fold, so 44 inches total, and then straight down, and it has a curved hem, and that's the only thing there. And honestly, all of these hems probably need increasing anyway. I had them pinned to the dress form and they did not touch the ground, and if you notice, I actually didn't even cut off the bottom of this, and there was no hem, obviously. So I am going to need to add length, and the reason that I've put this on already is so that I can determine just how much length I need to add. So what I'm going to do before I cut anything is I am going to measure from here to a little bit above the floor. I have this set at the height for where I'm wearing heels, by the way. I don't want to train on this, so I'm going to set this hem to floor length because then I can turn up the hem from there and it should be exactly walking length for me. So I'm going to measure in the center back, at the sides, in the front, basically everywhere that I need to so that I can determine how long I need those pieces to be. By the way, this front piece is cut on the fold on this side, so I'm not actually tapering this at all because then it wouldn't be a straight piece. I'm going to cut this piece just to a K, or fold it first and then cut it just to a K, because otherwise it wouldn't be a straight piece. The reason that I'm doing this all to K, by the way, and not to L or to M is because there should be enough flare in this pattern that it doesn't matter that my hip measurement is actually larger than what it says. It should, fingers crossed, be fine. Up here where it curves, and especially where I'm taking an even more exaggerated curve, I am going to kind of need to do little pinches out because it's not going to lay flat. So you can see I've done tiny little creases here so that I can get this curve in. And there's my pattern piece. So I'm having a bit of an internal struggle about how much I should be lengthening each of these pieces by because every single seam appears to be different. So basically what I did was I measured each seam where it would hit on the dress. So right now I have the 2 pattern pieces for the front and side front. They're actually pinned to the dress form, and I did like the darts and I did the little pleat and everything. So, but they're all pinned there on top of my petticoat. And at each of the seam points, so seam here, seam there, and then center front, center back, I took a measurement of what that would need to be to get to the floor. And then I compared that to how long the pattern piece actually is at that point. And it's all over the map. Like the center front length to get to where I would want it would need to be 4.25 inches longer. The side of the front piece would need to be 4 7/8 inches longer. The back of the side piece would need to be 4 inches longer, and the center back would need to be 1/8 of an inch longer. So I'm really a little bit confused because normally I would kind of lengthen the same across the board, but this doesn't appear to want me to do that. I'm really tempted to lengthen each one by like kind of splitting the difference and do like 4.5 inches across the board. I know that that's going to be way too long in the back, and that is a waste of fabric, obviously, even if I turn the hem up super deep, which I don't need to do. And I'm torn because like right now I feel like I have a lot of fabric, but also this dress is covered with pleats and there's bias trim too. And right now I think this fabric is still available at the store, but in a week or two, will it be? Because it's Christmas fabric. So, I mean, I guess it's not a big loss to like lose 4 inches potentially, but it's still something. I don't know. I am going to go ahead and cut these pieces out tonight though. I think I am going to split the difference because I don't want it to be accidentally too short, and I have a habit of making 1880s dresses accidentally too short. So I don't know what happens there, but maybe it's just that the bustle sits differently on me than it does on the dress form. Who knows? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to lengthen each piece by 4.5 inches and do that as the length. So basically we will be looking at a center front length of 46.25 inches. Yeah, I know, I'm tall, I get it. Side front length of 40, I'm doing the math in my head, don't judge me. Of 47.1/8 inches, I think. Yeah, 47.1/8 inches. Back of the side piece will be 49.5 inches, and then the very center back will be 55 7/8 inches. So that's what I'm gonna do. I just want to address a quick thing that I've noticed about truly Victorian patterns, or I think a lot of the print at home type patterns as well, and that is you have to be really careful with your iron. So when you're ironing this, I hope this shows up on camera, when you're ironing this, you see all this gray that kind of smudges all over. That is the iron smudging your ink all over. So make sure that you're not ironing this down, face down on top of your fabric, because I believe I have had it transfer before. I learned the hard way, and you just want to be really careful. So what I recommend doing is, I mean, A, have your pattern ink facing up, but B, if you iron it like I have, because I wanted to get the creases off, make sure you rub your iron on something first, clean off your iron surface before you go to iron on your fabric, because again, you don't want any ink that is transferred from the pattern onto your iron to transfer onto your fabric. That would suck. So be careful. One other note that I want to add as I'm cutting out this fabric is that the back width of this pattern, I believe, was 44 inches, and my fabric is quilting cotton. I haven't measured it yet to see the width, but normally quilting cotton is between about 42 to 45 inches. So really, I'm just gonna go with whatever the width of my fabric is. If it's longer, great. If it's a little bit shorter, oh well, I will just make do and not have the gathers quite as dense. So now I'm gonna go cut. All of my pieces are now cut out, and I have just pinned them around the form. So kind of bunching up the gathers in the back, pinning them. I did actually kind of pin the darts just so that I could see where everything looks like. And either this is going to be wonderful, or I'm going to look like a giant circus. So it's going to be one of those. I'm hoping that it will be the wonderful one and not the circus, but there's a possibility. So I'm really liking how it looks though, even if it is a little circusy, whatever. And the next step that I'm going to do is actually I'm going to figure out the overskirt, because I don't have a whole ton of this fabric. I want to get something really large like the overskirt cut out first before I move on to the trimming. The other reason that I want to do the overskirt first is because I'm not really positive where I'm going to put the pockets, whether that's going to be in the overskirt or the underskirt. Because if the underskirt is accessible, then pockets in the underskirt work fine. If the overskirt covers up where those pockets would be, then what's the point of those pockets? And therefore I need them in the overskirt. So before I even seam these together, put them on a waistband, anything like that, I am going to figure out the overskirt draping. Now, I do have a truly Victorian pattern for an overskirt from the 80s, but it doesn't really look like what I'm going for. So this is, again, the artwork that I'm going for with that style of drape, and this is the pattern that I have. Also, this pattern apparently, so I got this secondhand, and this pattern is apparently cut to a size small, so that probably won't do much good for me because there's like a 15-inch difference in waist sizes between a size small and the size XXL, which is the one that I would need. So maybe not the most useful. So I think it's going to be a matter of playing with the fabric and kind of draping it into place, particularly to see how I can get the stripes to lay the right way. Because if you look at this, the stripes on here are really doing a lot of diagonals on here. And I need to figure out how to do that because my fabric obviously would wind up being on the bias if I'm totally diagonal. So I have to figure out where the straights are, where the bias parts are, and just kind of play with that. I currently have my fabric all rolled up, and this is actually like a lot of yardage to play with. Like it's kind of actually hard to drape with this much yardage. So I will probably unroll this and test it out. But basically I got the underskirt. The front and back piece were cut out of my like additional piece of this, and then the side pieces were cut out of the yardage here. And one other thing that I was really being careful about doing is that there's going to be a lot of trim on here that is actually going horizontally. So pleats, for example, that are going to look like this as opposed to straight up and down. So it's going across the grain. And because of that, I really wanted to utilize the selvage wherever possible. So one side of the selvage is printed with Joann, and it has like kind of that weird texture where it's thicker and not right and everything. Whereas the other side of the selvage looks super nice. It just kind of has like a little bit of a fuzz on the bottom here, but otherwise it's like a clean edge that I could honestly just use as an edge without having to hem or anything. So ideally, I would like to do that. I would like to maintain as much selvage on here as possible so that I can pleat it up without having to hem that section. I know that just the sheer amount of pleats that I'm doing, there will be parts that I'm going to have to hem. I know that's going to have to happen because I'm planning to do these pleats twice on the underskirt and once on the overskirt. So I know it's going to happen. But if I can save myself a little bit of trouble by utilizing this whole selvage, great. And I probably have about, if I started with 10 yards, which again, I'm not sure. If I started with 10 yards, then I probably have about 8 yards worth of selvage. So that is a lot to play with, and therefore I have to be careful with my cutting. So that's my next thing. I am going to figure out the draping of the overskirt. So often when I'm looking at how I might initially start draping something like this, I will look to see if I have any sort of pattern or diagram that is similar. In this case, this, which is the original fashion plate, and then this, which was kind of my drawn version where the skirt comes up a little bit higher to show off that bottom skirt trimming. It's pretty similar to Patterns of Fashion, this 1887 to 89 dress, the way that this skirt is shaped. Now obviously this doesn't utilize stripes, but just the way that this skirt is draped in the front and kind of falls down in the back, it's really pretty similar. So I think that starting with this sort of pattern is going to be my best bet. Now, of course, I have drawn in this book, so ignore my drawing, which was this, and I don't even remember what skirt that was from, but the front skirt panel is this one, side skirt panel is this, and then I believe this is the back skirt panel. So it's just going to be a matter of kind of playing with these shapes and with the stripes in my fabric, trying to get it to sort of drape into this sort of shape so that it will kind of look like this, aka like that. So that's what I'm going to do, but that will be for tomorrow because it's time for me to go to bed. Have a good night. I think I figured out my drape. So this is what I just like pinned onto the form. Literally, it was basically the first thing that I pinned on, and it's a really funky shape highline. So I will show you what that shape looks like. I also don't know if I'm going to keep all of this excess that's kind of in the center here, or if I'm actually going to do a seam and kind of make a chevron up the back. Might be really pretty, but yeah, it's a very, very odd shape, and all the excess is still on here. I literally just pinned this to the form. So let me show you what this funky shape looks like. Okay, so this is my super funky shape and also my inch measurements. This is totally not to scale at all. But basically this and this is the waistline. And so this is all getting pleated up into about 8 inches. And size-wise, we've got about 92 inches total. This is a flat selvage of the fabric. And then there's 16 inches here, which is where it meets the front pieces. So this is like the side. And then this is getting cut out, but I've just folded it in for now, but it's getting cut out of the yardage. And so this is the hypotenuse of 28 and 46 inches. This is the part that I may remove because that's that excess. So I may just kind of do a cut here and a cut here and take out that excess that I don't really need, because I think that's going to be putting me a little bit later into the 80s. So that is what is creating the bias for me. By having the top here, it's actually, this is again not to scale, so it's actually way more of a slope, but by having this on a bias and this on a bias, it's making my stripes be on the bias. So as you can see by looking over here, it's really biasy over to the side. It does get flat in the very center back, but it's really brief amount of time that it gets flat, and then it goes back into bias on the other side. So this, of course, I'm not able to just cut this right now because I realized, remember how I was talking about the selvage yesterday? I realized I did it on the wrong side of the selvage. So I just need to translate this to the other side and then cut it, but hopefully that should be fairly easy, and I'm going to do that now, and then I can figure out the front pieces. The one thing here is that I am a little bit worried that I'm starting to run out of yardage. This did take quite a bit of yardage to do this. Okay, so this time I've flipped it over now so that the selvage with the printed part is on the bottom, and that way I'm not using that other selvage that I want to use for the pleats. And I've just really super loosely pinned it to the form this time, but what I did do was I actually pressed this fold where it's at the angle, and I marked kind of all the points where I'm going to need to cut. So now I can cut off all of the excess and get this to be just the bustle back piece, and then I can do the front piece. So I've moved on to the front, and I've been playing around with various ways to drape the fabric to try to get it to look like this, where the stripes continue this diagonal type movement all the way across, but the skirt is pulled up in the little pleats right up here. And I have determined that it's impossible. This is the closest that I've gotten to that pleat layout, which just kind of show them side by side. That is what I'm going for. That is what I have, but also it's just not right. And I use this with kind of a scrap fabric, so it's also causing this piece to be asymmetrical, which I don't actually want. I want this to be symmetrical because this is early 80s, not late 80s, and they liked symmetry a little bit more in the early 80s. So I'm going to undo this. That is my plan for after dinner because I need to go eat something. So I think I figured it out. I really didn't want the front drape to have any seams in here, but I think I do want it to be diagonal. I'm just not positive because, of course, if it's diagonal, lines back again because I'm talking. If it's diagonal, then it's obviously not specifically symmetrical because there's a diagonal stripe. So I am kind of torn. I do really like what I've done here, which is I've made a few darts, which I probably would sew out as opposed to pleats. Right now they're just pleats. And then I've pleated up the sides here on each side. And then what I've kind of done here is I've just faked the hem by kind of tucking it up so that this little edge here, that is where the skirt would stop, the apron drape would stop. So it's just that short bit that stops right there. The rest of that would get cut off. And I both like it, but I don't like it because do I want the stripes? I mean, I want the stripes uninterrupted, but do I want them to be diagonal? Oh, I just don't know. I mean, it's a hard decision because then the other option that I could do is I could do where the stripes start straight up and down in the middle, but because I'm pulling them over to the side, they wind up being diagonal on the sides, which would probably make them symmetrical. This is definitely tough. The good news about this is that the friction pen does erase entirely from this fabric, so I could actually draw out all of these lines as if I'm going to cut it like this, and then try it the other way, and hopefully be able to get it back to this way if that is what I decide. So it's just a lot of playing around and fiddling, but again, I'm really liking what it's doing on the side here. So, that is my dilemma. Lion, what do you think? Lion, what do you think? He thinks he's going to play dangerously and hook himself on my iron cord. Okay, thanks, Lion, for your input. Okay, this is option number 2. So here we're going for vertical stripe overskirt on vertical stripe underskirt, but when you pull the vertical stripes to the side over here, they do get a little bit of a slant. Not much, just a little bit. And I feel like I kind of like this because it will make the pleated section pop. I did kind of do up a few mock pleats here so you can see what that would look like. And for example, to hold it down here, it does pop really nicely, but I'm not loving it. And actually, come to think of it, when I look at my inspiration image, these pleats are actually down here and these pleats are vertical. So this would be just the red showing. And if you notice, this section is horizontal. So I think I want to try this one more time with it being horizontal up here, coming up to kind of a diagonal up at the back. Now again, this is an 1876 skirt, so although this is my inspiration for the skirt trimming, this is totally not what it's going to look like because this is natural form. So I am going to try this with the front section being horizontal, just see what that does, if I like it. Otherwise, I think I'm going to go back to my diagonal skirt. That's my thought. So the next option is horizontal, which I kind of like initially just because I like what it's doing here on the sides as it pulls up. Again, I'm liking the sides, I'm just not liking the front. But if I do this with the trimming, then I feel like the trimming doesn't pop as much because I'm already getting different directions going on here. And there's one other thing that I realized here, which is I actually mocked up a little bit of the different types of trim, and I'm kind of hating this one where like you pleat out the white. I know I didn't mock up very much of it, but I'm just kind of hating it. I feel like these red stripes are not wide enough to do this style of trimming. And like the pleat, there's just almost nothing in there. And then the red, there's very little there. And it's just, I'm not liking it. Yeah. I'm tempted to try doing where I would see red and white and just pleat that way, but I feel like then the pleats wouldn't pop at all. I do really like the horizontal pleats. I think that those are just gorgeous, or the horizontal stripes on the pleats. I think that's gorgeous. And I also mocked up this little bit of bias, and I'm liking this bit so much that I'm really tempted to put this not only on the bottom of the skirt, which there's supposed to be 2 layers of this, 2 tiers of this on the bottom of the skirt, but I'm tempted to put this on the apron drape as well because it just looks nice. But if I put this on the apron drape, I don't think it could be a horizontal or a diagonal apron drape, because if it's diagonal, these are just going to blend right in. And if it's horizontal, it's just going to pick up here. So I feel like it wouldn't pop. So I think I'm going to go back, put the vertical one together on here, try it out with some of the trim that I put together and see how that looks. So I've decided to try different trim layouts to see what would kind of speak to me. If you notice, I have the diagonal one back on here because I never actually unpinned it to begin with. This is just like the other end of the yardage that I was working with the horizontal and vertical one. And now I'm just trying some trim. So I ruffled up some eyelet lace with my ruffler foot, and this is a red velvet ribbon that I got around Christmas time from Joann's. And then this is the pleated horizontal bit with the diagonal bias part, and then also with a little bit of braid that I had in my stash that matches perfectly. And I really like the braid on here, actually. I think it lends a total nautical flair that I'm totally here for. I'm still not feeling this though. Like, I like that it's breaking things up a bit, but I almost wonder if it's breaking things up too much. So I think that I have to go back to the vertical trial of the overdress and maybe try it with that trim and see what I like. Now that would mean 3 layers of the same trim if I plan to do 2 of those on the skirt, and then one of them probably with a shorter ruffle and narrower bias on the overskirt. But I'm kind of thinking that's what I want because I just think this is too much of a departure. The eyelet lace is too girly. The ribbon also would not do well there because that is curved, and so it's just not great. Although I love the texture of the ribbon, I'm a sucker for velvet ribbon, and I do plan to probably put some velvet ribbon bows on here. I just think that wrong place, wrong time. It's not supposed to go in that section. So I am going to put together the vertical stripey bit again here and just see how that does. Honestly, like, I do kind of like the diagonal one. It is growing on me. It's just this trim that is not growing on me. I don't know. I mean, maybe what I should do is just some of that horizontal pleating right on the bottom of the diagonal section there, maybe with the braid. I don't know if I have enough braid to do 3 times around though. This is the amount of braid I have. But that is an idea. Unfortunately, I only pleated up 1 test section, I think, so I don't know that I can just hold up another one, but that is an idea, so maybe I'll have to pleat some up and try that again. Okay, I know it's kind of a mess with like all of the excess bits surrounding what's pinned on there, but I have pleated up a little bit of this horizontal trim, put some braid on there, and then I do have the other horizontal trim with the bias trim there on the underskirt, and I think I'm liking it. Like, I think it's the right mix of kind of crazy but sane, like the Victorians did. I mean, that's basically like their thing. They were just crazy with trim and stuff and patterns and all of that. And I think that this is the right mix. I think I am still going to try vertical, since I haven't actually tried the vertical with laying out trim on it. I think I will go back to this little lump over here, the other end of the yardage, and try that with vertical, see what it looks like with the trim, see if I like it any differently. But I am definitely not disliking this. I think it works in a really crazy way. So at least I have 1 potential option. I'm just gonna give that other option another try. So I am really having a hard time making my decisions for the front of the apron drape, the overskirt. And I think it's something that I'm going to need to really sit on for a while and just think about and figure out as I go. And so I think that the next best step for me, since I do want to keep working on this, though probably not tonight because I've wasted all of my time on this apron front, but I think that I want to keep working on this tomorrow at least, and I am going to put together the underskirt. I am going to go ahead and add pockets in the side seams because it's not that much work to add pockets, and just in case I'm able to use those pockets, able to access them, I want them to be there. I have a feeling it's going to get complicated to try to put them in the overskirt, so it'll probably be easier just to reach up under the overskirt and access those pockets anyway. So that is my plan, to put those pockets in the underskirt. And once I put the underskirt together, I'm also probably going to go ahead and either pleat or gather up the overskirt in the back because I know that I already like that shape. I'm really liking it just the whole time, even that I'm playing with the front of the overskirt. I am thinking that it's going to be this diagonal one just because it's really catching my eye the most, and I feel like I'm seeing a lot of diagonals in fashion plates of this era, and I think it was just the thing. So trying to make this symmetrical is going to be maybe a little bit more challenging. I still think that in general in like 1884-ish, they were still going mostly symmetrical. It's not a big deal if it winds up being asymmetrical though, because that was coming into vogue about that time. So, you know, I can mix and match if I want. We'll say it's somewhere between 1883, 1885-ish, and that'll be totally fine. I would like to figure out the overskirt because it's going to be hard to start cutting the trim for the underskirt before I figure out the overskirt, because right now I have one pinned up on one side of my length of yardage and then this one pinned up on the other end. So cutting out the trimming gets a little difficult. I've been doing that with like the scraps and the offcuts, and that's why I wind up with this mess going on down here, because I basically just have it folded over itself to try to get pleated parts out. I do really, really love the look of those horizontal pleats, and I also really like the bias down at the bottom on the underskirt. So that is my plan. Tomorrow I'm going to seam up the underskirt, put some pockets in there. Ideally put it on a waistband because it will be on a separate waistband from the overskirt. And if I get that far, maybe I can even get towards a hem. That would be really great because once I hem it, then I can start decorating. So I have a lot of work ahead of me and a lot of decisions to make. Honestly, this is the hardest part about bustle dresses. Bustle dresses are not difficult to make, to sew, to assemble, to put together. They're really not. Like, you can use your machine, they make sense, they're fiddly, but they're not hard, they're not difficult. But they are really difficult to make your design choices. So if you're just following a pattern and you're doing exactly what that pattern says, bustle is like super, super easy. But if you're trying to cobble together different design choices and do your own thing, then it gets hard. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why I really like to do reproductions of things, because then it's not that hard. Then I just like do it. Now, obviously, I did run into the fact that this fashion plate that has inspired me is not actually possible because they drew the shape of the dress and then they drew diagonal lines across all of the shapes of the pleats, and that's just not how fabric works. So sometimes you do run into those sorts of things when you are copying things and you realize that you cannot copy it because you're working with a 3D item and that was an artist who maybe didn't know all that much about actual fabric. It happens. Anyway, I have design choices to make. I'm gonna mull this over while I sleep probably too, so I will see you all tomorrow. So I'm starting to assemble the skirts, and to start off with, I am pinning my pockets into place. They are going in between the front, the center front piece, and then these side front pieces. That's what I have right here. These are side fronts. And the side fronts also have a dart that is going to be sewn in, and then one little pleat. The center fronts just have 2 darts, one on either side. So I'm doing all of that first, and then once I've done that, then I can start to actually assemble. The opening of the skirt is going to be between the side and the back, probably on the right hand side because I find those a little bit easier to do, and that will just be left open. I might do a placket. I don't often do plackets, but I probably should do a little placket, so I will do that in there. But I'm going to go ahead and sew all of these little bits, and then I can put these together with the front piece. So that will be the next step. So I started to pin the waistband on just now and then decided I really ought to put it on the form once more just to see how things were laying, because I was a little bit concerned about how wide this front piece is without any shaping. The dart that's nearest to the center is all the way over here, so it's pretty significant. And looking at it on the form, which doesn't really have quite as large of a curve here as I do even, it is way too, like, not shaped in the front. It's way too flat, I guess is the word that I'm looking for in the front. Basically, the way that this is hanging, and this is again just even on the form, this wants to be like here. So I need to make some other dart that's closer to the center than what it currently is so that I can get a little bit more shaping there, because it is just a flat sheer panel and that's going to look super unflattering. So I'm going to go ahead and stick some more darts in and then pin it up again and see how it looks then. So I kind of just pinned in place an additional dart on each side that's right here, basically aligned where this bone is on this corset that lives on Lady Jane. And although that does put it super close to this other dart, I don't hate it currently. I mean, obviously it's just pinned. I don't think it's going to be visually anything bad. Plus this is going to have the apron drape over it, so really doesn't matter there. And it is hanging a little bit better here, even just from that like 1 inch, maybe inch and a quarter that is darted out on each side here. So over here though, I still feel like this seam wants to be a little bit more here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another dart kind of right in the center of this piece here, because we've got dart here and then pocket here. So I think a little dart here would help this to just kind of hang a little bit better. So I'm going to pin that in place, see if that makes any difference. So I didn't really measure it or anything, but I did pin this second dart in. I think it would need to go just a squidge bit this way to be centered between here. It still wasn't quite right though. So I did one other thing, which was this is a dart over here. And I actually decided to just kind of turn this into a pleat. So I increased it and made it a pleat like the one right next to it. And now I think it's much better. The other thing that's interesting here is that now this seam right here is laying exactly where I had it when I was just kind of pinning all of the skirts to the form to look at how the back draped, which was at this bone. So I'm thinking that that is probably where it needs to be, because that's how I was liking it before. That said, I don't like it when pleats face forward. It just is weird to me. So I'm gonna make these face backwards. I'm gonna undo this, well, this is just pinned, but I'm gonna undo the dart that's underneath this, have these both face backwards, but be the same size and the same location. And then I'm going to actually take these darts in. Now, normally I actually do pleats, not darts, in my bustle skirts. I don't think I've ever darted a bustle skirt before. But this is again going to be covered by the apron drape, so I guess that darting it out will make it maybe just a little bit slimmer right here. I really don't know. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dart that, do the same thing on the other side, and then switch those pleats so that they go the other way around. It's kind of annoying that it wasn't like hanging right, but I'm glad that I did that now before I put on the waistband, because now it's looking like it's hanging quite nicely. And I think it's going to be so much better. So once I do that, the thing that I was having to decide to do before was, do I want to pleat or do I want to gather? I'm pretty sure I want to pleat, even though it's more work. I just like the look of pleats. So I think I'm going to pleat all of those facing towards the back, just like how I'm moving these guys around. So that'll be nice. I think everything will look quite pretty. I'm going to work on that and I will see if I get that finished tonight. Who knows? This seems to be laying a lot nicer now. I have all of those darts done and the pleats and everything, and the shape is a lot more, you can kind of see that it is allowing for a more curve up front, which was really my goal here. So now I can go ahead and pleat up the back and put that all on a waistband. All right, waistband is on, and this is what the pleats in the back look like. I really like how they came out. I basically just followed where the striping pattern was and pleated so that there's like 2 stripes kind of hiding under each one, and then I matched up like where the red is to where the red is so that the pattern would still stay the same. So that is all set. I am going to hang this out on the dress form overnight and then hopefully be able to do a hem on this tomorrow, though of course that does mean putting on everything so that I can actually mark the hem and be responsible about it and not just do it on the dress form, because it will not end up right. But once I do the hem, then I can do the trimming. So if I procrastinate, I can always start working on the trimming, but otherwise I should probably just put the corset on and do all of that tomorrow. But I really like how it's looking, and I think I'm going to call this the Peppermint Bustle. I will see you tomorrow. So I am currently procrastinating actually putting on all of my undergarments and everything so that I can try on the skirt and get the hem length done. And so we'll see if I get to that later tonight. But what I've done first here is I've taken my overskirt, which I already serged the back of it, because again, I haven't decided on the front overskirt shape yet, but the back was great when I patterned it out and cut it out and everything. So I did serge it, and then I have pleated up half of it so far to the dress form. But I'm really liking how the pleats were laid out. I had to kind of fiddle with it a bit, and they're all just eyeballed, but I just really like how it's draping and how these bias bits are kind of happening here. I think that that's really the aesthetic that I was going for, so quite happy with that. And then I am also cutting out my strips for the pleated parts that go at the bottom of the skirt. There's going to be a ton of these, and so I know that I won't be able to do this all with selvage, but I'm hoping that I can get at least one tier out of the selvage kind. I've only cut out this much of that, but I do have my extra yardage here, and that has some bits that are like already cut basically, so I just have to cut them to the height, and then it has other pieces where I have been using for draping, so I do have to figure out if I have stuff that I can cut from that bit. And I am going to go to Joann's and pick up more of this because I am really starting to feel like between the bias strips trim and all the pleats and the fact that I still have to do the bodice and the front of the overskirt, like this is not enough. So luckily they still have a whole bunch of it at Joann's. I'm just trying to decide how many yards to get, but thinking at least 3 probably, just to be like safe and feel comfortable. Hopefully that's even enough. Oh my god, pleats take up so much and bias takes up so much, so this dress just takes up so much. I have mentioned in other videos that I do things to scale, but I am working with a combination of a couple different fashion plates here. So I took the fashion plate that my pleats are coming off of, and I did this to scale. I marked out where her waist is, how long it is from her waist to the bottom, how tall the pleats are, all that sort of stuff, and figured out how wide the bias strips should be and how wide the pleats should be based on scale. And then I decided that I hated both of those numbers. It told me that the pleats should be somewhere between about 3 5/8 and 4 inches, and that the bias should be 2 inches wide. And I tried that out and looked at how that looked together, and it looked terrible. It was just too short for the pleats and too wide for the bias. So what I'm doing instead is my bias strips are going to be 1 5/8 inches finished, like after I folded in the edges, and my pleats, at first I was going to go for 4 inches because that's kind of what I had mocked up originally when I was trying it before, but then I realized that I just kind of wanted one more stripe involved. So I went one more stripe up, and I think that makes it about 4.5, but I also went another half stripe up so that I would have enough that I could put it underneath the bias. And obviously when I do this, where I will have to hem it, I will have to cut it wider as well, making sure that the red is on the bottom so that it matches the rest of this. And that's kind of why I'm hoping that I can get one full one out of the selvage. So we shall see. Anyway, I am going to pleat up all of this trim, finish cutting out other strips so that I can pleat that up as well, and just be pleating for ages. But I'll check in with you when I finish pleating. I have been working away for hours now, literally like 2.5 hours maybe, at the pleats. And I have finished all of the pleats that have the selvage edge. So yeah, there's a lot of them. But the good news is that if I measured correctly around the bottom of the skirt, then this is enough to do 1 tier around the bottom of the skirt, plus it has like, I don't know, 8 inches extra or something like that. So I get 1 tier with my selvage edge, and then the rest of them will have to be hemmed, as there should be 3 tiers total. Now that said, I also went ahead and cut out the overskirt, the front, and right now it's just kind of pinned up on this side, but I really do like the shape that it's making here at the bottom. It might be a little bit long, but I kind of like the length, and I'm wondering if maybe I don't want pleats on the overskirt and I just want to do the 2 tiers of pleats on the underskirt. So it's definitely something that I have to think about. And I am hoping that tomorrow I can get the rest of the overskirt pleated up and attached to a waistband, plus try on the underskirt, hem both of them maybe, or at least hem the underskirt, and then start putting these pleats on the underskirt. I also want to make the bias trim. I know that that's all way too much for tomorrow, but yeah. And it's not really going to be until I cut out the bias trim if I can tell if the rest of the fabric that I've left, which is scattered here and here, will be enough for trims plus bodice. I didn't actually purchase that extra at Joann's yet, and so now I'm kind of thinking 3 yards might be too much, but this did take quite a bit of pleating to do all this too. So I do still have to cut out that second row of pleating, which will be actually a little bit wider because it has to have the hem on it. This I'm going to do as the top row, and then the hemmed one will be the bottom row, because I would rather have the hemmed one be like closer to the ground, potentially brushing the ground. Well, it's a walking length skirt, so it shouldn't brush the ground, but yeah, I'd rather have the hemmed one on the bottom. So anyway, I have a lot more pleating in my future, considering this took me 2.5 hours, but at least this part is done. And it looks really pretty. This is all eyeballed, by the way. Again, I rarely measure my pleats, so if I can eyeball it, you can too. I know that they're not identical, but they're pretty darn close. So I'm happy with them. Anyway, good night. I've done a couple of things so far today. First, I went ahead and I basted all of the tops of my pleats so I could take all of those pins out and it wouldn't be so pokey and dangerous. And I also serged across the top of here so that it would stop fraying, and I serged on the two ends because I'm not exactly sure where the pleats are going to match up. I feel like I have a little bit of excess, like 8 inches or whatever, like I mentioned. So I just serged on the ends for now, and then at some point it'll get cut off and I'll serge at a different place. I also took the overskirt front piece here and I figured out where I wanted all of the little pleats to be on there. And this one I am doing pleats, not darts. And I made sure that they matched up on both sides, then basted those in place. And I also made sure that the side little pleats match up. This is where it hangs down. And I basted those in place. Now I know that I have too much, like it's going too far out this way down here at the bottom. So what I've done over here on this side is that it involved a lot of pressing and looking at the form and pressing and looking at the form, but I've pressed this out so that this is the angle of the skirt that I want now. This is just pinned in place, but you can see just how much excess that is over here on the back side. So now that I know how much is excess, I can cut this down to a 1/2 inch, actually probably like 3/8 inch seam allowance, maybe even less, because I'm going to be binding this edge with bias tape, and do the same thing on the other side and probably rebaste because some of my basting goes off that edge. So that's what I'm going to do there. Then I'm going to finish this edge with bias tape on both sides. One of these sides is going to be the skirt opening. This side is still just like the other side. It's just going to be bias tape done there, and then the edge of the back side is going to be turned under and finished. And on here though, I will probably do some tacking stitches to tack those together so they don't swing, but there is actually enough of an overlap that they really should lay nicely. So that is the next thing I'm going to do. Once I finish that, then I can put this on the waistband. Well, actually I still have to pleat the other side of the back, but then I can put it on the waistband, and then I can do the hem. Then I can try everything on, including the underskirt, and see how it fits and make the hem and everything. So I will come back to you soon. The overskirt is all set on its waistband now, and I didn't hem the bottoms, but I pinned the hem. So I pressed and pinned the hem in place. I think I'm actually going to wait to hem them until I know more about the trimming, because if I can machine hem it, if there's trim going over it, then even better. But I really like how all these pleats are looking. I think they're just so pretty. So now I'm going to go ahead and try on both skirts, mark where the hooks and bars need to go, and mark the hem of the bottom skirt, and then I will see about trimming the bottom skirt. So please ignore the mess that is my floor right now, but I have put the skirt on and it's looking pretty great in the front. I could have even done with it being like an inch longer because I have not turned up the hem yet in the front. So it's going to have to be a very narrow hem. I might even, I might actually do a facing on this instead. But the back, which this was supposed to be not a trained pattern, but remember how I said the back looked weirdly long? Yeah, the back is weirdly long. The back weirdly goes into like a super shaped train. You can see the shape that's happening like right here at the side seam, and it's just weird. And yeah, I should not have listened to the pattern, because I'll bet that I'll be cutting off exactly what I thought was excess in the first place. So need to do that to level out the hem here in the back because it just looks silly, and make it even with the front. And then yeah, facing sounds like a pretty good idea. Probably just a narrow one, maybe a couple inches of facing, probably just from like muslin or possibly organdy if I have organdy, but like in the bustle period they didn't really do that so much, so I don't know that I want to do organdy. But I will do that, and then I can put the pleats on as well. I do want to show you also the overskirt here for a moment. So this is the overskirt on top, And again, I have pinned the hem, but I haven't actually sewn it. But I'm really loving just like how it's looking. I think it's really quite nice. The back is kind of caught up right now, which I didn't notice, but I will fix that later. The only thing that is maybe bothering me a little bit is that this part is kind of like flipping where you can see the inside. I don't know that it bothers me enough for me to actually do anything about it, but it's not really what I had planned. But the rest of it I think is just right. You can, okay, the back's not caught up on this side so you can see the shape. So I really like how the shape is, how the pleats in the back are. I showed you a close-up of that before, and I'm just really happy with it. The waistbands are hitting pretty much at the exact right place. I'm gonna mark where that is and on the skirt and do hooks and eyes on that tonight. And ideally, I would love to finish the hem on the underskirt tonight as well. Maybe we'll get into the trimming, who knows. So I've gone and I've pinned up the back of the hem, and I think it's where I want it now, because now once I do put the facing on, it will be just a little bit off the ground. It's like maybe a ½ inch off the ground currently. And that is, I think, the length that will look good with where the front of the skirt is laying as well. And funnily enough, I was just about right on, because when I added those extra inches in that the pattern called for, that was what I did not need to add, because that's what I've now removed. So just FYI, if you make this truly Victorian pattern and you're trying to make a walking skirt length and you're using view A, ignore that and chop 4 inches off the center back piece, because yeah, you don't need it. Now it's walking length. So I want to show you what this facing looks like. I did have an organdy strip that was already a couple inches wide. I don't know, I think this is like actually 3 and a bit inches wide, and it was long enough to do the entire hem. So this is just a flat strip, and it's got the selvage edge on this side. Normally I would like turn this under, but because it's selvage, I don't really care. It's just going to be up. I am going to hand stitch all of this in place, but I seamed it to the bottom of the skirt, right sides together, and then flipped it up. Now most places around the skirt, it's a very, very narrow hem. I did this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then I folded it up just that tiny bit, so there's like the tiniest bit of the stripes that go onto the inside of the skirt folded. But in the back, I didn't actually wind up cutting off enough when I cut off the excess. So with the back, I've tapered it out so that by the time it gets to the center back, I think it's like a good 1.25 inches, somewhere in there, that is being folded up in the center back, and that makes the hem hang evenly all the way around. Technically it's still actually a little shorter in the front, but I like that, and so it hangs the way that I want it to. It's fully off the ground and everything. And again, this I'm just going to stitch by hand all along this border. Actually, you know what? I don't have to stitch this by hand because the pleats are going to cover it. So I'm going to stitch this all by machine, because why not? Normally I really wouldn't do that because it's like super ugly to have a machine stitched hem that's this deep. But I mean, yeah, it's all gonna be covered by pleats. So like, why not? I have been working away at the row of pleats that will go on the bottom. First, I cut this out a little bit wider than the first one that I did because of the hem, and then I hemmed this up. I did hem this by machine, but I feel like you can not even really tell the stitches that are there because I put them right at the edge of this red line, and I think that they blend in really, really well. So I'm totally fine with hemming it by machine because I'm also not that crazy. And if you are that crazy, kudos to you. But I've been pleating up a while now. Dora has been helping me. Thank you, Dora. And I've still only got this much done, so not that great. Okay, I guess she's not helping me anymore. Oh well. Well, I finished pleating all of this row of pleats here that I had assembled, but in measuring it, I think I'm like 20 inches short, like significantly too short. This measures to just about 100 inches, and I'm pretty sure I need like 128 inches, so really almost 30 inches too short. So I guess I'm going to have to do another strip. So last night I double checked how much would likely be needed to add to the pleated ruffle that was more than what I had already had, and it actually came out to only about 10 inches. So hopefully if I measured that correctly, that's all I need, because I took a section today and added it on and pleated it up, and it was about 13 inches extra. So I have a little bit of leeway there, but not much. So That brings us to the end of this vlog. Next week, make sure you come back because I will be putting on the trim, making the bias trim, and most likely starting pretty heavily onto the bodice, or at least the bodice mock-up. So do be sure that you are subscribed so that you know when that video comes out. But thank you so much for joining me for today's vlog. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week with my sewing vlogs like this on Tuesdays and other costuming content coming out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to support me and the work that I do on this channel, I do have links to both my Patreon and my Ko-fi account down below. Once again, thank you so much for joining me this week. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!